Hi everyone, in this video we're going to review the examples from Geometry Lesson 2-3, which is using deductive reasoning to verify conjectures. So let's take a look at example 1. In example 1, we're asked to identify examples of inductive reasoning or deductive reasoning. So in part A, it says there is a myth that toilets and sinks drain in opposite directions in the southern and northern hemispheres. However, if you were to observe sinks draining in the two hemispheres, you would see that this myth is false. Now, they want you to do an observation. That means that this is inductive reasoning because you're not taking a fact, you're taking an observation. So part A is inductive reasoning. In part B, it states there is a myth that you should not touch a baby bird that has fallen from its nest because the mother bird will disown the baby if she detects human scent. However, biologists have shown that birds cannot detect human scent. Therefore, the myth cannot be true. Now remember, they're using a fact here. Because they gave a fact that biologists have shown that birds can't detect human scent, we're calling this deductive reasoning because it's based on a fact. So just remember, inductive reasoning uses observations, deductive reasoning uses facts. Now let's take a look at example 2. In this example, we were applying the law of detachment. So let's see what's going on with that. In example 2, we need to determine if they use the law of detachment properly. So remember, they're going to give us a conditional statement. The fact that they give needs to be about the beginning of the statement. The conjecture that they give needs to be about the ending of the statement. In part A, it says, given if two segments are congruent, then they have the same length. They've told us AB is congruent to XY. And their conjecture is that the length of AB is equal to the length of XY. So this is valid because this fact tells me that two segments are congruent. And this conjecture tells me that they have the same length. So this is valid. In part B, it says, given if you are tardy 3 times, then you must go to detention. Shay is in detention, and the conjecture is that Shay was tardy at least 3 times. Now, this is not valid because this fact, Shay is in detention, tells us about the ending of the statement. That's not allowed, okay? They should have said Shay was tardy 3 times. Then we can say that she's in detention. We don't know why she's in detention, but it doesn't have to be that she was tardy. Maybe she got in trouble for a different reason. So they reversed this fact with their conjecture. So this is not valid. So when you're dealing with the law of detachment, remember the fact they give has to be about the beginning of the conditional. And the conjecture they give has to be about the ending of the conjecture. Otherwise, it's not valid. Okay? Let's take a look at the law of syllogism next. In example 3, they want us to determine if the conjecture is valid by the law of syllogism. So in part A, they give us these two conditionals. If the measure of angle A is less than 90, then A is acute. If angle A is acute, then it is not a right angle. The conjecture is if the measure of angle A is less than 90, then it is not a right angle. So the thing to remember about this law is that these two middle parts, the ending of one sentence and the beginning of the next, need to match. Now remember, they are allowed to switch the order of these statements, but as long as the conclusion of one sentence matches the hypothesis of another sentence, you're allowed to use the law. And it allows us to skip over the repeated part. Okay, so let me show you how that would work. I'm going to use some colors and some crossouts. So notice, angle A is acute matches angle A is acute. So what I did is I crossed them out, And I'm going to check to see if the conjecture says if the measure of angle A is less than 90, then it is not a right angle, because I can skip over the crossed out part, the part that repeated. And that is what the conjecture said. So my answer is that this is valid. They did use the law correctly. In part B, it says, given if a number is divisible by 4, then it is divisible by 2. If a number is even, then it is divisible by 2. The conjecture is, if a number is divisible by 4, then it is even. So let's take a look and see if we can determine what is repeated in our two statements and see if they're using the law properly. So the part that repeated is, it is divisible by 2. But they're both at the end of the statement, not one at the end and one at the beginning. So I'm not allowed to apply the law of syllogism, and this is not valid. Okay, so just to repeat, this is not valid because the part that repeated is both in the conclusion of both statements. Okay, this I can use it because one repeated part is at the end of a statement and one is at the beginning. So I'm allowed to use it. When I'm allowed to use it, I take the beginning that wasn't repeated and combine it with the ending that wasn't repeated. Okay, that's how it works. So we have one last example where we have to draw a conclusion using our laws. In part A, we're given, if a team wins 10 games, then they play in the finals. If a team plays in the finals, then they travel to Boston. They tell us that the Ravens won 10 games, and we have to draw a conclusion. Now, notice they give us two conditional statements, and the ending of one is repeated at the beginning of another. So this is an application of the law of syllogism. They told us that the Raven won 10 games, so the Ravens are traveling to Boston. So I notice that these parts repeated, I crossed out the repeated parts, and I combined these two parts. So the Ravens won 10 games, so they're traveling to Boston, and this is syllogism because I had two sentences and I crossed out the part that repeated. And I accidentally spelled syllogism wrong. It's supposed to have two L's. Okay. Now in part B, it says, given if two angles form a linear pair, then they are adjacent. If two angles are adjacent, then they share a side. Okay, again, notice we have adjacent angles and adjacent angles right here. Okay, so those are repeated. So I'm allowed to cross out the repeated parts and draw a conclusion. So we have angle 1 and angle 2 form a linear pair, so I'm going to conclude that they share a side, and again, this is syllogism. Okay. So that is what I have for the answer here. Now we did two examples of syllogism, but if you wanted to do detachment, if you wanted to recognize detachment, just know that they would only give you one conditional statement instead of two, and then you could recognize a detachment example. So that's it for this. Let me know if you have any questions, and hopefully that helps you with your homework.